Presentation of this ViewFinder episode is locally supported by UC Davis Health System.
I'm trying to remember a few things.
Losing control of one's mind is a frightening experience.
Sometimes it gets so overwhelming that you just want to quit.
Most people who develop a dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, didn't get there overnight.
Are you at risk for developing Alzheimer's or dementia?
This is of epidemic proportions. We know that about every 70 seconds someone develops Alzheimer's.
Coming up in this program, examining the brain as we age.
We can improve the symptoms, but the ultimate course right now is death.
Caring for caregivers.
He doesn't know who I am. He's very confused.
And the link between a healthy brain and a healthy heart.
Leading a healthy lifestyle early on will diminish the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and other dementias.
As we age, keeping our minds active is crucial. Taking care of ourselves as we get older will oftentimes help maintain mental strength later in life. You know, Alzheimer's disease or dementia can strike at any age, not just our senior years. And memory loss can have a huge impact on family members who oftentimes become caregivers themselves. We begin with a look back at how our beliefs about aging and memory loss have profoundly changed with time.
To those he loves, he is the problem.
A lot has changed regarding our thoughts on aging and memory. It wasn't long ago in America that people just became, quote, senile or lost their minds.
Some are failing in mind and body.
And for society as a whole, that was just seen as a fact of aging.
Alice, this is a house for our children, not for an old man.
Senility is still in the dictionary. If you go to Merriam-Webster, senility is the mental infirmity of older age. Well, that's a pejorative definition if there ever was one. You know, it's amazing if you think that up until about 1970, the old bromide was, if you live long enough, you're going to get significantly confused, you're going to be senile.
Today, we know a little forgetfulness as we age is normal, but memory loss that disrupts daily life, that's abnormal and a sign of a problem.
The standard analogy is if you can't find your car keys and you look and look and all of a sudden there they are and you know that you were looking for them, why you were looking for them, and what you do with them, that's normal. If you can't find your car keys and later you find them and you don't know what to do with them, that's abnormal. That's dementia.
But for decades, especially through the 1940s and 50s, when a person exhibited what we now know are classic signs of Alzheimer's, they stood a good chance of being sent to an institution.
A great many people with whom the average policeman must cope are mentally disturbed. A few of these become violent. Many are old people whose bodily ills are affecting their minds.
In fact, many people declared senile ended up in asylums, to the point where overcrowding became a national issue. So how did this happen? It begins with Dr. Alois Alzheimer discovering the cognitive disease in 1901 and later presenting it to a meeting of doctors in 1906.
And when he concluded, the moderator of that meeting said, well, any questions? There was no question. This was truly thought to be a very unusual, bizarre footnote that none of us would ever actually see in the practice of medicine. And boy, was everyone wrong.
In 1970, 69 years after Alzheimer's discovery, two neuroscientists, Blessed and Tomlinson, from the University of Manchester, published research that finally changed doctors' views.
And what they saw was a real game changer. They showed that most of those people who were being labeled as senile had these lesions in their brain, this litter, a glue-like litter, we call it tangles and plaques, that was exactly what a Dr. Alois Alzheimer in 1906 had described in one case as being a medical oddity. But Blessed and Tomlinson showed us that's not an oddity at all. That's not a medical curiosity. That's what we're calling senility.
Rita Hayworth was the first big star to be diagnosed with the disease in 1980. and she died from Alzheimer's 7 years later. But of all things, what really cemented the disease into the public consciousness was a letter to Dear Abby, dated October 23rd, 1980.
Pauline Phillips, who wrote the column Dear Abby, received a letter from someone who signed it as Desperate in New York, saying that her husband had been diagnosed with this disorder called Alzheimer's disease. And doctors didn't seem to know much about it, and it was just nightmarish. In the weeks after that letter was published, the Alzheimer's Association received somewhere between 30 and 40,000 letters saying, yeah, our family member has also been given that diagnosis.
Today, not only our thoughts, but our sensitivity to memory loss has completely changed since the days of simply calling people senile. And that's mainly because we know more about diseases that affect the mind than ever before. Here are a few things we know. Dementia is defined as a loss or decline in memory and cognitive ability. And there are many varieties.
So dementia is a large category. The most common cause is Alzheimer's disease, but there are other causes of dementia, like dementia purely due to vascular disease, dementia due to Parkinson's disease or Lewy body disease, frontal temporal dementia.
To be classified as having dementia, a person needs to exhibit not just memory loss, but a decline in one of the following criteria. 1, the ability to generate coherent speech or understand spoken or written language. 2, the ability to recognize or identify objects. 3, the ability to execute motor activities like walking. And 4, the ability to think abstractly, make sound judgments, and plan and carry out complex tasks. And the decline of these abilities must be severe enough to interfere with daily life.
What we know firmly about Alzheimer's disease is that it's mostly a disease of older people, that it does have some genetic influences, and it's unfortunate, but right now that we can't change the course of the disease once someone has it. We can improve the symptoms, but the ultimate course right now is death. And it's a terrible disease. It's a terminal disease.
But we also know that while there's no cure, medications can help.
Cognitive function in Alzheimer's disease can sometimes be improved with medications, not only prescribing medications, but also reviewing a patient's medication list to make sure there are no medications that are impairing memory function, especially when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, because they're very sensitive to certain medications.
And we now know if you have Alzheimer's, you've had it a long time.
Well, once you're diagnosed as having Alzheimer's disease, for all intents and purposes, you have late onset disease. You've had this process brewing in your brain for several years, potentially 2 or 3 decades.
We even know exactly what happens to the brain with Alzheimer's patients.
Specifically, we'll look at this region of the brain.
There is an accumulation of this starch, a glue-like protein that adheres like barnacles to the brain cells. Okay, we call those amyloid plaques. Then within the brain cells, we see these thread-like filaments or hairballs under the microscope that are called neurofibrillary tangles or tangles. Those just seem to choke the thinking brain cells, both from outside and inside.
But for all we know about the disease, there's still so much we don't know.
What we don't know is how some people get Alzheimer's disease in their brain. It looks like the worst case of Alzheimer's disease, and they're normal. Their thinking is normal, their behavior is normal, they're living independently until the day they die, okay? There are other people who have very little Alzheimer's disease, and they have a dementia.
To make it perfectly clear, Alzheimer's is a disease. It only affects some, and what we used to think about aging, that everyone eventually gets senile and memory loss was normal, was actually a myth, one that justifiably put fear into a lot of people.
Part of the fear that most people have is, I'm going to lose my mind. And that's not normal aging. That's called the disease process. And that's what dementia is. It doesn't happen to everybody.
We are cared for coming into this world, And oftentimes, we are cared for as we leave this world.
How many of you remember the winter in your homes and making a fire? Or was that for your father?
The big question is, how do we keep our minds sharp as we age? Are there steps we can follow now to help prevent ourselves from getting one of the most feared diseases of later life, Alzheimer's disease?
We know that about every 70 seconds someone develops Alzheimer's. This disease is unfortunately on the rise, mostly because people are living longer and mostly because the death rate from other diseases is going down. So fewer deaths are caused by stroke, cancer, heart disease, and so therefore that means that as that death rate goes down, the death rate for Alzheimer's is increasing.
We need to learn how to keep our minds sharp. One of the fears, big fears that many seniors have is they actually fear getting an Alzheimer's type dementia more than they fear death because it is such a frightening experience.
Ron, how do you describe where you live right now?
Where I live in, it's a long building, 50 feet long, and all kinds of funny things go on inside.
How long have you been coming here?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to guess that. Frequently, but I can't tell you how many months or weeks or years like that.
Tell me about Harry.
Well, he's married. Not really married, but he's got me almost married. So.
And he's your husband?
Mm-hmm.
There are 5.3 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease. That number is expected to reach anywhere between 11 and 16 million people by the year 2030. Short-term memory loss and starting to repeat yourself are often early symptoms of the disease.
This is Carmen Miranda. Very good, Mary. Carmen.
But memory loss doesn't just happen in our senior years. It can trigger at any age. One of the risk factors for Alzheimer's occurring in younger people is head trauma. A severe concussion or head accident can impact the brain.
Are you getting warm yet?
Researchers studying the mind at the University of California, Davis say there is also a strong connection between a healthy heart and a healthy brain.
What I say to those people who ask me, how do I stay sharp? How do I age successfully? The simplest answer is that your body and your brain are tied together. The better we maintain our general health, the more likely we are to maintain our mental or cognitive health.
Yay!
Vascular disease increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease, and when a person has both disease processes present, they have a synergistically detrimental effect on the brain.
We don't know precisely what starts the events in our brain that leads to the destruction of brain cells, but we're getting better at understanding that cascade of events, and we're getting better at understanding who is more susceptible. Interestingly, we're seeing that the type of problems that make us at risk of stroke and heart attack, that is obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking, seem to be the same risk factors for developing Alzheimer's disease.
Great job.
And I always joke to them that we're doing anti-Alzheimer's. Exercise all the time, anything that taxes the brain and right-left movement, anything that's challenging in the brain areas.
But exercise alone won't keep us sharp. Researchers say what you eat helps maintain brain health as well, and a diet that's low in saturated fat is very important. Also, age and brain development play a vital role when it comes to cognitive impairment.
Where will we have the biggest impact from the intellectual activity side is in the preschool up until about age 14 or 15, because the brain is very, very plastic, and by that plastic I mean it can shape new pathways until you're about 14 or 15 years old. And then after that, it's sort of trimming things up. The brain doesn't actually stop changing and growing until you're in your 30s, but it slows way down. And it seems to me that good early health, good early education are probably the more critical components to resisting late life cognitive impairment than any other thing we can do.
At the age of 87, Carolyn Schaefer stays sharp by volunteering at the Sacramento Choral Society and Orchestra. But that's not all she does. Carolyn also sings in the choir. She had her first audition at the age of 71.
Periodically, I think I better retire again, but then I think, no, I really want to see what's happening next and what's happening next. So as long as I can, as long as Dawn will put up with me, then I plan to stay doing it.
74-year-old Mel Walsh decided to go back to school at the age of 64 to pursue a degree in gerontology. Today, she is a writer living in Grass Valley, California, and has written several books. Her most recent is titled Hot Granny, offering seniors tips for staying sharp.
Being 70 today is really different than it was 20 years ago, and especially 50 years ago. I remember my grandmother being 70, and she sat in the house and she tatted, if you know what that is. It's like little intricate craft, needlecraft. And being 70 today, there's so many more things to do and such horizons, and we're in better shape.
Everybody. All right, now let's come up and leave the right foot back, and let's go down here. Now make sure, at the age of 62, I've managed to achieve the 8th degree black belt, and each day I am enthusiastic about doing workouts. I'd like to challenge myself to really be an example of what practicing of Taekwondo is all about. 3, 4.
The black belt itself doesn't mean a lot per se, but what it does mean is I'm getting new material and being held to new standards, so I'm never stagnant. I'm always moving ahead, and that's important.
But there are those who have not aged as gracefully, like Ron Mersick. Staying sharp will be a constant struggle for the rest of his life.
When you close your eyes, what do you think about?
Nothing. Sometimes it gets so overwhelming that you just want to quit. You don't want to do anything for a while.
Caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease or dementia can lead to depression. Oftentimes, the family caregiver is the one providing the love, support, and comfort. But it's extremely important that the caregiver gets care too. Seminars like this one can help.
What's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
And you know, I get that question all the time, so let's talk about that. I want to explain, first of all, the word dementia is a Latin derivative of dis, meaning away from, and mens, meaning mind.
Dementia especially hits home for Laura Wayman, who trains and educates caregivers. Laura tells a story about a family member who sacrificed her life to care for her father, Jack. Jack suffered from dementia.
Her family said, "How can we help?" And she said, "I don't know. This is my burden. I need to care for him." And about 6 months after she had started to have those conversations, realizing how difficult it was to care for somebody with dementia, she sat down to have dinner with her beloved Jack, and she suffered a massive heart attack. Now, Jack's dementia was so far advanced, he didn't realize to help her. He went next door to some neighbor friends and said, "Peggy's very tired. She's sleeping on the floor." And they ran over to help her. By the time they got there, she was gone. Peggy was my mother. I realized at that time that the statistics are staggering. 68% of the time, that caregiver, primarily due to the stress, will be sick or pass away before that loved one they are caring for. My mother was one of those statistics.
Over time, dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, only gets worse. So it's critical that caregivers understand what dementia is and how they can care for loved ones with the disorder.
So there's so much overwhelming emotions that the caregiver cannot resolve because they're constantly caring for that person. That person needs supervision 24 hours a day. They get no relief from that.
About 40% of our participants, because of their dementia or Alzheimer's, have difficulty communicating with us because they no longer have the ability to form the words to express their thoughts.
One area where caregivers and seniors do get relief is through animals.
When the volunteer dogs come, some of their ability comes back and they're able to express their feelings and emotions, and maybe not in words, but with their body language.
Whether we use our emotions to communicate or our voices, getting old doesn't have to be a sad journey. Wrinkles can simply mean wisdom, not weakness. When it comes to companionship and its effects on us staying sharp, research has shown that married couples live longer and fare better compared to their unmarried counterparts.
One of the things that the research shows that there's a real difference after about the age of 50, 55, and companionship after that age becomes critical.
What we are seeing is that marriage has an effect not only emotionally, but in very concrete ways, such as low blood pressure, lower risk of cardiovascular issues, quicker recovery after illness, lower stress hormones circulating in the bloodstream, even a decrease in dementia.
All kinds of very specific physical markers that we can actually measure. So it's a very protective phenomena to be married, if it's a good marriage.
I think marriage has changed every aspect of our lives. Certainly, I'm sure I wouldn't be as healthy as I am without Fred's encouragement. We stay sharp for each other.
We can look at each other and like, what did I say? Do you have to get this done or do you have to get that done? And it comes to us.
We can look at each other and not say anything and know what we mean.
But what does all of this mean for singles?
There's no risk factor in being single. The risk factor is in being alone. To live a healthy, happy life, I think we all have to have people and we have to have meaning.
I think it's just, we just love each other. We just know that we're together.
Whether it's a spouse, a family member, a good friend, or even a pet, understanding the importance of building positive social connections is vital to maintaining physical and mental stability as we age. As we age, it is natural to think about ways to stay sharp. And if we listen to our doctors, we will hear it over and over again.
Basically, what's good for your heart's good for your brain.
What's good for the heart is good for the brain.
But when it comes to diseases like Alzheimer's, many people worry it's all hereditary. But that's not really true. Dr. James Carey has spent his career studying lifespan and says staying sharp starts with you.
25–30% of lifespan is inherited, and the rest, 70–75% is really environmentally determined, and that means that it's in your control. In other words, your destiny is really in your control. Quantity of life, that is how long you live, flows from quality of life.
Doctors say the idea that you can improve your memory by working on puzzles and other brain games is simply a myth, and we need to do more that involves the mind and body.
Right now there's a big push and a big business on brain games and computer games, but doing things like crossword puzzles and doing the same thing over and over again makes you really good at that task. But there's no evidence that it generalizes into your day-to-day life.
Doing crossword puzzles, doing Sudoku, It's more general than that, okay? It's not doing routine mathematical equations over and over again. It's more to learn new things, to stimulate the mind in new ways. Pick up a new language, learn to play the piano if you don't, or an instrument, or take up a new hobby that involves the mind and the body.
The aging process can't be avoided, you know, and I think learning to accept what happens to us as we age and to deal with it, to grow from it, to view it as a challenge rather than a curse, I think is really important.
If you or someone you know is suffering from Alzheimer's disease or dementia, there is help for both caregivers and for patients. The Northern California chapter of the Alzheimer's Association has plenty of resources available to help you. But the most important thing for you to know is that you do not have to walk through this alone. I'm Rob Stewart. We thank you for watching, and we hope that you and everyone you love stay sharp for years to come.
Two, 3, 4.
To order a DVD copy of this program, call 888-814-3923 or visit kvie.org/viewfinder.
Presentation of this ViewFinder episode is locally supported by UC Davis Health System.